You're watching Revving with Revenew, the series designed to help leaders improve profitability through proactive supplier management. In this episode, CEO Kris Westbrook sits down with Jeff Laplante, our Global VP of Business Development, to explore supply chain resilience, from reputational risk to cost management, and how companies can strengthen supplier relationships with greater transparency. One of our team leaders is available in the chat to answer your questions live throughout the session. Let's get started.
Hey, Jeff, thanks for joining me today to talk about supply chain resilience and managing risk with your suppliers. So, thanks for coming.
Oh, you're welcome.
Supply chains have been under immense pressure. What are the most significant vulnerabilities you're seeing right now?
You know, I would kind of classify that into about three different categories. Like the significant pressures, reputational risk, operational risk, and then cost management are kind of like the three big buckets that I think if you were to pull CPOs across the world, those are the things that they're really most worried about. Touch on each one of those very quickly. Like reputational risk, actually got it probably easy for me just to tell a story. So one of our large clients here in North America, multi-billion-dollar food and beverage manufacturer, recently got caught up in a reputational risk thing that they weren't even aware of. And what happened was it was discovered by the Department of Labor that their supplier was actually employing underage workers, right? Meanwhile, if you just take a look at their contract and how they were working together, everything looked really great on the surface. Even if you dug one layer below the surface, everything looked fine, right? So the reputational risk, you can get unknowingly and unwittingly dragged through the mud along with that supplier who maybe had less than scrupulous business practices in behind. So reputational risk is a big one. The other thing is like for a lot of our clients, environmental or natural disaster risk. A good example of that could be vegetation management in the utility industry. You know, a lot of wildfires have been sparked by lines accidentally blowing into vegetation that maybe hadn't been trimmed back as per contract. And you get lumped in with those incidents. And so there's a lot of focus on reputational risk right now. The second one is operational risk, okay? And that's where you're, just a high-level summary of what that means is just basically like, is your company and is your operation going to keep going with the suppliers that you have in place, right? There's a lot of things that can happen at the supplier that happen sort of behind the curtain that you're not aware of, and it can have a negative impact on your operational efficiency very quickly, right? And almost unknowingly. And if you don't have the right supply chain strategy in place to mitigate that, then you could be caught in a situation where it could take weeks, potentially months for you to ramp back up to the right level of performance and operations. I think the last one is probably the one that CPOs focus on initially the most, which is just like, cost management, cost savings. Am I protecting the cash in my organization the right way? I would get this question in my previous life where I ran a supply chain organization. It's like, what is your main job? Like if you had to tell somebody, what is the big thing that you have to do? It's like, well, my job's simple in a way. I have to make sure that we're protecting our most valuable asset, and that's cash, right? Are we spending it properly? Are we spending it with the right people? Are we spending it in a way that gets us the best financial results, right? So those three things combined, I think are what is top of mind for most supply chain organizations globally right now.
So when you were leading a supply chain organization, what were kind of the couple, 2, 3 biggest levers you used to control costs?
Yeah, great question. I think when I first started, like as you gain experience, you learn a little bit more about what are the right levers to pull. But as a kind of like a newly promoted into that role, I'm like, hey, I'm just going to go with the tried and tested and true method of putting a lot of things to RFP, going out and testing the market and grinding suppliers down to the point where it's like, hey, great, we saved 5%. What I came to learn, because all of a sudden now you're at the head of that organization, guess where people go with stories about what's not working well? They go to you. And so previously I hadn't really gotten those stories. Now all of a sudden they're all coming to me. And what I learned is that when you grind things down and you get it really, really skinny, might look good from a cost management perspective, but you've just introduced cost into the operations side of your business because you've introduced an inefficiency. So what I learned very quickly was the best and most effective way to save overall costs was to make sure that you had three things. You had operational support for what you were doing, and they were sponsoring the approach that you were taking. You had good support from the supply chain organization as far as what the right go-to-market strategy was to get the best possible price for the levels of service and materials that you needed. And then the other thing is just make sure that when you operationalize this, that you have the right partner with your supplier, that you're transparent through the whole process. You're telling them exactly what you want, how you want it. That way they're able to price it aggressively and fairly for, in return for a 5-year commitment. So basically, at the end of the day, what I'm telling you there is that you have 3 really happy stakeholders.
Right.
And that's really where you get your most savings.
Very good. Very insightful. In this environment, how can companies build stronger, more resilient relationships with their suppliers?
I think the big one is transparency. And I think that's been kind of a bit of a transition from probably 10 years ago to today. 10 years ago, you maybe had 2 or 3 key suppliers that you would be 100% transparent with. Like, here's where we're going as a business. Here's where the pressures are on our business. Here's the kind of partnerships that we're looking for. And I think like that was a very successful business model for those top ones, but it's also very resource intensive. Okay. So what I think I see, evolving now is that companies are pushing that a little further down into their supplier profile. And they're just improving the overall transparency that they have. And that's really driving the results that they need in that area.
Yeah. And like you said, that's what they need. 10 years ago was let's just get the price as low as we can to win the business and hopefully develop that relationship. But you're right. They do definitely need that going into especially a new relationship.
You know what it felt like sometimes? Like I think I may have shared it with you, Kris, at some point, but I used to work at National Oil Varco before I joined a very large E&P company. And if you ever watch MMA and you ever see like a guy on top of the other guy just like feeding them punches and you're just like, what the heck is going on? This is not even like fair. That's what it felt like in a negotiation. And I think it's evolved now to where it's like 2 people kind of like together working towards an outcome that can be positive for everybody versus just like ground and pound.
Yeah. Put it on a spreadsheet.
Yeah. It was not fun on either side doing that ground and pound negotiation.
When disruptions do occur with suppliers and in the business, what's the best way to, for business continuity to kind of keep things going with those relationships and operations?
Yeah. Well, I'll actually put on the operations hat to answer that question, then I'll kind of bleed back over to supply chain management. So like throughput is important. Doesn't matter what industry you're working in. You need to have sort of raw product or raw material in and finished product out. Doesn't matter if you're a B2B business or if you're selling direct to consumer or B2I, business to industrial. You need to have your plant or your infrastructure up and running and generating cash for you. So in the event of a disruption, that's the first thing you got to focus on is how do I keep the asset running? How do I keep it generating cash, right? So oftentimes in those disruptive periods, you're going to see a spike in the relative cost to operate it, right? While you're managing a crisis situation, right? Crisis could be anything from a natural disaster, could be an operational interruption, could be a supplier interruption or material supply interruption, but it disrupts the asset, right? So getting focused on that as your primary objective is absolutely critical, okay? The second thing that starts to evolve after that is like, okay, you're initially spending a lot of money to keep the asset running. Okay, now how do we start to take that pressure off? Outreach into the supplier community early while you're going through that crisis management component is very, very important. So for me personally, I would always give the directive to category managers or to just contract managers is, even if we're going to put the bulk of our spend with a single supplier to get the best possible price, make sure we're always maintaining good relationships with the second and third place finishers to any RFP, just to be ready to pull them in off the bench if they're needed at any one point during the response to a crisis. Things change all the time. There could be a merger, there could be an acquisition. Maybe you build a new asset and the supplier that you've selected can't handle that work. Mm-hmm. You have to maintain that flexibility. Even when you're talking to your first, second, and third sort of suppliers on your triage of like, who do I want to give my business to? Transparency is really key with all of them, right? Even to the third place finisher, right? Look, here's why it didn't happen this time. But if you want it to happen the next time, here's what you need to do, right? So you're helping them understand what they need to do, to potentially win more business with you, maybe with a competitor of yours. But you're also getting them ready that in a crisis situation, they can slide right in almost seamlessly and work with you.
And it's their opportunity to earn some stripes in that, if they're given that chance to, to show them what they can do and hopefully get future business.
Yeah. Well, 2017, Fort McMurray wildfires, right? One of the long-term contracts that was awarded for, multi-million-dollar, multi-year contract was as a result of their response during that crisis situation, right? They outperformed the incumbent, and initially we split the work, and eventually it moved over to, they were the second place finisher, not the third place finisher in the RFP, but eventually they were the ones that earned the right to do business.
Yeah, that's great. So Jeff, thinking about your time as a leader in your large E&P company, what was the pivot point, or what was some of the reasons why you chose to go to a third party to do your contract compliance reviews?
Kris, that's a very interesting question. I think a lot of supply chain leaders would wrestle with how do we get started with this? Why do I even need to do it? And maybe to answer the question, I'll give a little bit of context about the journey that I was on as a supply chain leader, kind of evaluating this service and deciding hey, is this something that we should do? Should we really be auditing our suppliers? They're the lifeblood of our business, right? They really help us deliver. And so I'll start just by saying the function itself, this piece of work resided underneath the internal audit group, which is fairly common. It usually resides in either a supply chain management organization or the internal audit organization. Sometimes it's even shared. But in the case of the company that I was at, it was entirely under the internal audit organization. And I remember it well. We would get a knock on the door once per year, and it's like, hey, Jeff, we need to pick 10 suppliers to audit this year. And I'm like, okay, sure, whatever, right? Tell me which 10 they are. There was no really strategic thought given to it from a supply chain perspective. Fast forward a year, get a knock on the door from a third party, and they're like, hey, can you tell us a little bit about how you do supplier contract auditing and why you do it, right? And I couldn't really answer the question, so I just answered their question with a series of questions back. So why don't you tell me why I should consider using a third party? Why should it be in supply chain and not an internal audit? Through that journey, that Q&A and a lot of patience by that third party, we internally at the company I was at made the decision that we were going to shift this from internal audit from being entirely over internal audit to be a shared program between both organizations. We felt we were going to get the best possible outcome that way. And what really changed was a little bit more strategic about which suppliers we were picking to audit, why we were choosing to audit them, making sure that we had operations, supply chain, and an internal audit buy-in for the list of suppliers that we were going to audit, right? Each group got a different outcome, but each group was really, really happy with the outcome. Let me just really simplify it. Internal audit was really happy with the fact that we were managing risk a little bit more effectively across our supplier universe. Okay, supply chain was happy because there was usually a cost recovery which helped them with their savings target. Plus, it also validated sort of their contractor or their supplier management plans. And then the operations group was really happy because, again, they got a little bit of cash back, as well as they now had better transparency into how that supplier was working for them. I'm making it sound really easy, but I mean, getting that alignment across those three groups is really what drove an excellent program at the company I was at. It was just the right time and it was the right opportunity for it to shift from internal audit to supply chain management and for us to be in the lead chair. And for me personally, as a supply chain leader, I felt it gave me the confidence that I could speak to my reporting line, the executive in my reporting line, and say, look, we're probably managing 80 to 90% of our total supplier risk exposure from a cost management and just business continuity perspective. If I had been asked that question prior to the program being underneath that organization, I would have had to say, I have no idea. All right. Very uncomfortable to do to your reporting line. In short, leveraging third-party expertise to help you run your supplier audit programs from a supply chain leader perspective. Not only do you get sort of like the enhanced results that I just kind of summarized there, but you also have the opportunity to go to your executives and say, look, don't take my word for it. We used a third party, and here's the results that they delivered. And so it's a much more comfortable position.
You brought up transparency a few times now, and it sounds like this third-party service was able to provide that transparency into the relationship and help with that relationship moving forward, so that kind of all cards are on the table, and you know who you're working with, and help for a better future together.
You know what, Kris? It's really well put. But it wasn't without, like, I was scared, to be honest with you. Like when that person came in and said, "This is why you should consider doing it," every question that they answer, I got progressively more nervous or scared, right? About, oh my gosh, we're going to expose a whole bunch of weaknesses in our contracts. Oh my gosh, we're going to expose weaknesses in our supplier strategies and what we're doing. Where I was initially scared, I started to realize just that knowledge and having that transparency is actually going to make us a better supply chain organization, right? We're going to know where our gaps are. We're going to know where to put resource time and which projects to put on our plate that are actually meaningful, right? Whereas before we were just kind of guessing, right? And so, yeah, you're right. I've used that word a few times, but for good reason, because without it, I think you're fooling yourself, right? You don't really know where your gaps are if you don't have a third party who's not in there every day with you. If you don't have them working on that for you, then I think you're missing out on opportunities for you to develop really good, meaningful supply chain management projects that can help you get even better.
I think it shows that, good leadership. I mean, leadership's understanding your weaknesses and putting a plan together to continually improve and grow and learn from those things.
Yeah, I mean, like, you got to go discover your blind spots. If you don't, then I think you're just fooling yourself, right? It doesn't do any good if you're too busy patting yourself on the back with how great you think you're doing. Right. Meanwhile, the house is on fire in behind you, right? And I think you're right. You got to be confident as leaders to understand that you don't know everything, right? And trusting others to do that for you is going to help you with that.
Sounds like you would definitely use a third party if you had another opportunity.
I think if I could rewind, I mean, like, how you can replay things and go back in time and go, oh, if only I knew now what I knew then, I probably just would have done it faster, right? Get to the answer faster. Yeah. And that would have given me a little more runway to deliver good news on the organization.
Well, Jeff A., I appreciate you coming on and talking about supplier relationships, and we hope to do it again with you soon.
Anytime.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.